Welcome to SmartBrief on Workforce Live. My name is Kanoe Namahoe, and with me today is Laurie Ruettimann, an HR leader turned author, speaker, entrepreneur who has dedicated her career to improving the employee experience. Welcome, Laurie.
Well, thank you, Kanoe. I'm very happy to be here today. And listen, let's talk about all the things wherever you want to go.
I love that. Lori and I, we met through a colleague a few weeks back, and we started talking as people who are in HR do, and just batting around a few different topics. And I was struck by something that she said. She said HR and people managers need less theory and more tools that just work, and that did it for me. So I knew that we had to sit down and have a longer conversation and really dig into some of the trends and the big narratives that we're hearing about. And one of those is that's been getting a lot of attention lately is this notion of managing multi-generational workplaces. And Lori said something else which I appreciated, which was we have to stop managing generations and start managing expectations. So she's going to unpack what that looks like in practice in our conversation. So, Lori, let's start with why do you think this topic of generational management has taken off the way that it has? What does science say about it?
Well, I think generational theory is super fun and interesting. It's like Enneagram, it's like Myers Briggs, it's like DISC. A lot of people believe that if there's a theory out there that teaches you something about yourself and how to improve your work with others, you should grab onto it. So, just so everybody knows, I'm an Enneagram 8 and I'm a Capricorn, right? So, this is what I bring to the table. But a lot of this is what it is, which is just fun and interesting, but not rooted in any sort of science. And
Mm.
generational theory has been out there for a while, and a lot of really smart and talented people talk about it. I'm thinking about my dear friend Lindsay Pollack, or another good friend, Alexandra Levitt, who have just really broken it down. But what I think they get to are life stages. And there's absolutely research around who you are and where you are in your life stage and how that influences your point of view. But generational theory is just that. It's just a theory. It feels good to say, oh, everybody born after 2000 is a digital native, but that's A, not true, and B, a wide dispersion to make a lot of against a lot of people. So when I hear generational theory, I laugh about it like, oh yeah, kids these days, because I'm 50, I'm Gen X, right? But there's not a lot of there when it comes down to how people work, who they are, and what they need in this world.
That's a really good point. This whole Gen X, millennial, Gen Z conversation, it can go a lot of different ways. But when you really start having those very authentic conversations, you realize that really what you're doing is just making sweeping allegations,
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
and you understand why people get very frustrated and annoyed with that.
Yeah, generational theory is fun, but you know what's evidence based? Zip code. Where you were born, your
Uh,
zip code determines a lot about your life, more than the year that you were born. There's also a lot of good research about birth order. And yet, a lot of that can get tricky and complicated and really hard to bring into the workplace. But you know what feels really good? Talking about how kids these days like to wear hoodies and really want to work from home. Because back when I entered the workforce back in 1995, my appearance was criticized. My appearance, people made jokes about, but instead of like retreating to generational theory, I just had to suck it up and go to J.C. Penney and buy older boomer type clothes, right?
yeah.
I had to fit in. I didn't get the
Mhm.
chance to wear whatever I wanted to wear. So, it's easy. It can be accurate when you're talking to a majority group, but it leaves out all sorts of discussions about race, around gender, around identity in general, about ability and disability. And so, I don't know, pick the year you were born, and maybe there are a couple accurate things to say about someone who was born in 2008. But more often than not, what's most accurate is zip code and birth order. And like, why are we making decisions about any of this in the workplace?
Oh, I agree. In fact, that's a really good question because when you said 1995, I think back to that time when I was also in the workforce, just barely getting into it after college, and culture at that time. It would have never occurred to me to say I'm going to wear a hoodie to work. It would never. That just wasn't a thing. They said you did, and that was the way it is. And I don't think there's I think I learned a lot of good lessons in that. I think that was very valuable, but I don't think it's as black and white as we've tried to make it.
No.
And I think we've gotten ourselves into a lot of trouble with that.
We have. There's also this very proven fact that Generation X was a smaller cohort. So we didn't have the volume of people in the workforce to say, wait a second, I want to wear what I want to wear. I want to show my tattoos.
point.
I want to show my piercings. At my very first job, it was no visible tattoos, and I had to take the piercings out of my face. And my boss actually made fun of me and said, "Who do you think you are? Punk rock HR?" To which I filed that away and then started a brand many years later. So it all pays off. But I think had I had more people my age around me in the workplace, I may have been a little braver. If there was more pop culture showing who I was and what I was all about at the time, I would have been braver as well. But the only thing we really had on TV was like Friends and Seinfeld, and not even in reruns, right? So that wasn't really a good representation of what I was experiencing. I had student loan debt, and I had a life I wanted to start and a home I wanted to buy. So when someone said, you need to improve your wardrobe, off to Talbot's I went, unfortunately. Yeah.
And you cut your hair, and you did the things that you knew to do. And again, I still think that has some value to it. I think I learned some good life lessons about it, but I also think as culture evolves, the workplace has evolved. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit. You had mentioned in an earlier conversation that we had that there are three pillars that you really kind of think about when you talk about this topic, and they were communication, performance, and process and technology. So I'm going to start with communication, which is, what are we doing wrong with communication, and what should we be doing instead?
I mean, what a big existential question around communication. What are we doing wrong with it? I think everybody of every generation can relate to the experience of working at a job where expectations change and change regularly. The economy changes. There's no change management strategy. We're not communicating performance expectations, or we communicate something, but it becomes outdated in a minute. Just recently, there are examples of CEOs who are saying, if you don't embrace AI tools by the end of the week, you're fired. And that's every generation, right? So communication is the thing that everybody pays lip service to, and nobody does well. We don't do it well in our personal lives, and we don't do it extremely well in our professional lives. But the organizations that do it and do it well do it with humility. They don't act like they have all the answers. I think of some of the great CEOs that I've worked with in my life, like Robert Glazer, someone who I admire, who's a noted author at this point and writes frequently on the topic of communication. And he comes from a place of humility. He comes with, I think, a really personality of curiosity. And that curiosity not only permeates just how he operates, but permeates his executive leadership team. So, communication is like the pillar of how we operate at work. And if you think about every successful business that's out there, small, medium, and large, they're having a two-way communication up and down the career ladder.
Yeah. And that, I love what you had to say about humility. I also think that's a really hard, I think it's something that we say a lot. You're right, that we pay a lot of lip service to this notion called communication, and we say a lot of things that sound nice, and they make for great articles that I run. But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts and the nuances of what humility looks like in practice, we recognize it when we see it, but I think it's a tough thing for people to tap into. Some people naturally have it as part of their character. And is that something that we can, I don't want to say manufacture, but for those leaders, I think sometimes the reason it gets rejected as a communication tool is people don't literally know how to do it.
Correct.
And we say, we should all exercise better humility. It gets pushed off as a fluffy notion. What is it about leaders that you've seen? I'm going a bit off script when I say this, but leaders that you've seen who do a good job with it, is that just integral to their character, or is that something you think they work on?
Yeah,
What are your
I think about some of the great leaders we know, like Warren Buffett or Sarah Blakely of Spanx. And Sarah in particular comes to mind because I once heard her tell a story where a young employee came up to her and said, Sarah, I've hit a snag in a project and I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And Sarah said, I think you should do the job I hired you to do. Like, trust in your knowledge, skills, and abilities. Trust that you're here for a reason and take a swing. And if you take a good natured swing, doing all the things that I hired you to do and bringing that excellent body, that wisdom, that knowledge that you brought to the interview process, you're going to be just fine. Nobody gets fired for an earnest attempt at solving a problem. What people get fired for and where people don't trust is when somebody, tries to do a hack or a shortcut, or they make assumptions without asking really good questions and come up with a solution that doesn't work. So humility and communication are intertwined, but I think the bedrock of that is something that my friend Minda Hartz writes about all the time, which is trust. Organizations have to have a love language of trust. And Minda has taught me quite a bit about that. And if you don't actually believe that the world can be rooted in trust, if you're a leader who's cynical, who's angry, who's constantly thinking that people are trying to screw them, well, you're never going to have a culture or an organization where you can do extraordinary things. It's just not going to happen.
That's such a good point, and I appreciate well, first of all, thank you for using the word bedrock. I love that word, and I love that you put you put it so well, that it is they're intertwined. Communication and humility are intertwined, and it comes down to trust. And you're really talking, going back to what you said earlier about it. It's a two-way street, and I like what that one employee at Spanx did, going that she had the courage to go to Sarah Blakely
Yeah.
and just say it right there. That's powerful right there. That says this door to the CEO is open. You don't have to go through a bunch of people. There's no entourage around her. You have a direct pathway
Yeah,
to,
isn't that a
to that
beautiful
person.
story? It says so
It
much
really
about
is.
Sarah, so much about her culture. And she's married to another entrepreneur, Jesse Itzler, who talks about that all the time, about how you have to just get in with the people you work with and actually be at their level and talk to them about their real world problems. And when I was walking around, there was when I was working when I was younger, there were CEOs and executives walking around and doing management by bumping into people and looking into their cubicles, but it always felt like someone was looking over your shoulder. And I think Sarah and Jesse and so many other entrepreneurs and successful CEOs that I know who are doing this right aren't just like spying on you. They're not trying to get the scoop as to what's going on. They're actually having a conversation with the people who work with them. And those conversations happen at the good times and they happen at the vulnerable times as well. So I look to Sarah, to Jesse, to Warren Buffett, to so many big time leaders out there. Kat Cole is another executive that I put out there, for many years worked at Yum Brands. And Kat Cole was an exceptional leader, someone who people felt like they knew, who wasn't one person in front of employees and another person with executives. So it's really about understanding that you're not just a leader, but you're a human being too, and having a human to human relationship with the people you work with and who work for you.
And people identify fake. People know it when they see it, and they will respond to that. If you're going to be fake with me, I'm gonna watch my words and be guarded, and we're going to have a very plastic conversation. And sometimes, that some people are okay with that, but the leaders that truly make a difference and create this environment, this culture where people want to stay.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to work with at least two or three different people like that over the course of my career, and you never forget that. You never do.
No,
Um,
no. But can you imagine if Sarah Blakely had assumed that that young employee was too young to really know what she was doing and either spoke down to her or solved the problem for her herself? Like if she really bought into that
yeah.
generational theory? No, instead, she leaned into trust, she communicated, and she didn't buy into this trope that, what do millennials know? What do Gen Zs know, right? She
Yeah.
actually let the person take a swing and make a mistake. And I think when we buy into generational theory, we shortcut, we undermine organizational performance.
Ooh, that's good. That's a pull quote. Let's talk about performance. That was a great segue. So, talk to us about performance intelligence.
Yeah, well, a lot of times we make decisions about performance based on all kinds of weird data. Like we'll do these one on one meetings once a quarter, or even more often than that. But when it comes to actually looking at performance, we're just kind of, maybe buying into the old 360 standard, or, we're just survey a few people, but managers actually bring a tremendous amount of bias to those performance conversations and performance decisions. So some of the best organizations I've worked with, from manufacturing to veterinary organizations to cybersecurity, have really tried to think through what are the metrics that show performance, not just correlate, but are directly related to performance. And how do they build that into a system beyond their core HR, beyond payroll, but how do they really think about performance in a way that's gathering intelligence that they're collecting anyway that truly means something? And I think about a cybersecurity firm that I've worked with that actually took their recognition program that they were running on the side along with their core HR and started asking questions like, are the people who give and receive recognition the most actually people who are top performers? Let's look at this. What does this mean in our organization? And they crunched the numbers and they looked at the data, and they actually found that giving and receiving recognition was a clear indication that somebody was performing well in the organization. So they didn't discard the data around, the 360 feedback and all of that, but they pulled in recognition as another essential piece of data to really make sure that their performance intelligence was fair and they could quantify it and they can actually defend it.
Ooh, that sounds like they were testing it.
Well, they tested it, and then after a couple of iterations, really felt comfortable around going forward and bringing that into the process. So I'm really, when I hear that story, and there are many other stories about people who use recognition as part of their performance management process, and I just think it's such a smart and I think secret and almost underutilized way to get at performance a little better. I also like understanding who is networked with whom in an organization. Again, correlation and causation on that one isn't necessarily strong, but there are companies that I've worked with that have looked at who's essential, who's getting contacted, who's solving problems, who's using specific keywords in Slack chats to be helpful, to be the linchpin within an organization. And they have found that people who are heavily networked within an organization, who are seen as people who are pillars, responsible leaders, the performance is through the roof, right? So they took that, not necessarily to inform their performance intelligence process, but to really rethink about how do we get people to collaborate differently across different departments, across different sites as well, to make sure that we're knowledge sharing in a different way. So there's a lot of ways that you could do this, but I think the days of talking to your manager twice a year or even a couple
Oh, yeah.
times a year are over. And
Yeah.
yet, that's still, talk about bedrock, that's still the bedrock of so many performance management processes.
We're comfortable with it. We're comfortable with it. Employees know to expect it. And I really like what you had to say about like Slack channels, keywords, and things like that. That's digging into what I like to think of as nuance. You're
Yeah.
digging into the things that are authentic, that are raw, and that is really where you're going to start finding your most powerful collaborative systems. I think that's a question that rotates over and over. I hear it all the time. Like, how can we collaborate better, through departments? And we throw up spreadsheets and we create systems and we listen to, different platforms that are designed, and they've all got good intentions.
Yeah.
But we need better, more practical tools, and we spin trying to figure that out. And how do you start recognizing more people that aren't throwing their hands in the air? So when you're talking about this in performance intelligence, which I also gather from what you're saying is, I don't want to use the word time consuming, but you've got to dedicate some time and attention to that.
Well,
If you're
I
going to
don't
be
think,
looking through,
yeah.
through Slack channels and so forth and conversations, if you're really looking for the raw, rich data, you have to be intentional.
You do. You first have to know your values as an organization. What's important? How do you know when someone's doing well? How do you know when they're thriving? What does success look like? What does that mean? Is it traditional revenue markers, revenue per employee? Is it, customer service timing, whatever it is for your organization? But then beyond that, what makes someone valuable to the organization? What makes them a leader? Like, you have to spend the time up front defining success. And there are so many really great boutique consulting firms that can help you do that. You don't have to do that alone. That process exists out in the marketplace to have someone come in and help you understand the essence of your culture. And then what are the gaps? What are your blind spots? What are people doing that's amazing that you're not giving them credit for? And then to figure out what are the things you want to accomplish. Do you want retention to be better in your organization? Do you want people moving faster through the ranks? Do you not mind if somebody works for you for 3 years and then exits out into another role? Once you figure out who you are as an organization, you can then really start to figure out what to measure so that you understand how people are performing against those values. And I think that's the hard work. Like it's not easy, but it's easier to throw up a system, to buy something that's $5 per employee per month and then implement that for a year and a half and then get frustrated and go on the journey again for new technologies. But it's the same with us. We have to turn inward as human beings over and over and over again to understand who we are, what we want in this world, and where do we perform at our best. I mean, this turning in is essential to happy human beings who are thriving, to human beings who are rooted in self-leadership and individual accountability, and human beings who want to help. Those people turn inward. Why don't we do this for our companies? Why don't we do this for the thing that, pays the bills and keeps our communities thriving, right? If individuals can do this, take a good spiritual look at themselves, companies can do this in a secular way.
And I think we are definitely there in culture. 100%. We're at that point in history where, and I think AI has had a lot to do. It's kind of pushed us back into this being a human thing. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but jot down here. You can't autopilot some of the stuff that we're talking about. It really is intentional. It's turn off your notifications. It is block off your calendar for the day and dig into this data and really let the numbers start. Let the data earn its keep.
Yes.
And let it start doing its thing. And I think too often we do autopilot things because there's always a long to-do list. So I get why organizations are doing it, but I'm already so loving this conversation. So I want to take what you had to say about data and move us into process and technology. And you had said earlier that data is our friend. Talk to us about what you mean by this, and is that evidence-based HR?
Yeah. Evidence-based HR is something we don't talk enough about. We have a lot of beliefs about management and leadership and employee motivation that's actually rooted in pop culture, assumptions, and like really bad, unreplicated psychological studies. Like, somebody did a study with 7 people once that talked about motivation, and we heard about it on, ABC News, and then we're adopting that in our organization suddenly. So there's a lot of like really woo-woo stuff that we take as science in the world of work. And there are actually wonderful researchers and wonderful institutions who are focused on evidence-based management. And they all rely on data, but they all go slowly to figure out which data matters and which doesn't. And I think that's the really important part of this. And sometimes you can't do that alone as a leader, as an HR person, as a CEO or a CIO. You need external, either consulting help or even academic help. But those resources exist out there. And, we surveil the workforce so much. So we're not lacking in data to make better decision making. And we're not lacking in data to understand who's performing, but sometimes based on really old assumptions about the way the world of work works, we're looking at the wrong data. So if you don't have anybody on your team, and you don't even have consulting resources, you can start to go out there and make the University of YouTube your friend. You could read SmartBrief. You could do a million different things out there to get educated on what evidence says about human motivation, about performance, about change management theory. The science has never been better, but the problem is we have to pay attention to it.
You do. You have to dig into it. You have to invest in it. You have to make that a priority.
Yeah.
I
And you
think.
have to be willing to be wrong. Like the
Ooh.
assumptions we make about the world of work that, what people want today versus what they wanted pre-COVID are still the same things. We need to get rid of a lot of this, but also some of the things we want pre-COVID are the same today, right? And there's good research on what people want, why they stay, why they leave, why they perform, why they just quiet quit or quiet crack or whatever the word is today, right? The research exists and we don't need to make assumptions. We don't need to read a headline and go, yeah, that's true for our organization. We can actually take the data we have collected through our total and complete employee surveillance and start to examine it and see what our organization is truly doing. I also have to say, sometimes we look at a couple of key employees and we think they set the tone and the tenor for an organization, but it turns out they're not the right ones to look at.
No.
So that's where data can be helpful as well. When we've got a pool of one or two who's just are at the forefront of our minds and we make decisions based on that, we're doing it wrong. So the collective data that you have can be your ally in all of this.
I think that's one of the most common traps that managers can fall into. And most often, I see that happen with the ones that raise their hands the most. And that's a great way to completely miss some of the most valuable talents, some of your most valuable input that is quieter, that doesn't mean to fly under the radar. They just kind of do.
Yeah.
But they are huge contributors. I like to think of them almost like the Dennis Rodmans, who was definitely not a quiet person at all. But they are the people that if you don't have them, you don't win championships.
That's
It's just
exactly
that
right.
simple.
I
You
love
know,
I love that analogy because I was born and raised in Chicago. So I think it applies to Dennis Rodman, to Scottie Pippen. Not everybody's Michael Jordan, but it
no.
takes a team to actually move the team forward in the championship. So those people who aren't as visible, who aren't as noisy, they're the hardest ones to recognize.
Yeah.
But you know who recognizes them often? Their fellow colleagues, which is why I
Yeah.
like looking at recognition as a key indicator of maybe who's respected by their peers, who's relied upon by their peers. And so recognition programs can be essential to performance.
It sounds like you're saying there's a merging of data and human.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true at both work and everywhere we're going right now.
Oh, my, oh yeah, that's a
We
whole other
are
conversation. But yes,
Yeah, we are at a time in our lives where technology can actually enable us if we let it or hinder us if we let it. And we have a choice to make. We can either let the technology just confirm what we already believe and, give us kind of a sense of confidence, like what I think is right, and this is what the technology says. Or we can be curious and dig a little bit deeper, mine a little bit deeper, call in some experts to help us, and really use technology not only to challenge what we believe, but to give us a new path going forward. And I think that's the opportunity. I don't know how many companies are brave enough for it, but I'm ready to
mm.
support the ones that are. I don't know about you.
Ooh, that is a really important word, brave. Are you brave enough to really risk? Are you brave enough to be Sarah Blakely and to take that young person's advice, or that, I don't know, just go.
Yeah.
Go. Well, you know how to recover. You know how, if you make a mistake, we'll figure out how to recover. You're not going to take down the world. So,
No.
I think bravery is one of those, it's one of those words that can almost become like passion, like, it stops having real meaning.
Yeah.
But when we talk about what it looks like in practice, then you completely shift the power of what can happen next. And I think that's actually, I'm a big believer in change happens at the grassroots level. So when you start implementing things like be brave, do it. Go ahead and do it, and we'll stand behind you. What resources do you need? And we'll make that happen. And then if it doesn't work out, okay, well then we'll get the marketing team and the PR team, and we'll figure out what to do next. But it's not willy-nilly. You have to
No.
be intelligent with risk. But I think there's some really good examples that you've brought up today that we can use. So
I
forgive
want
you.
I want to say this is my 30th year of working in and around the human resources industry. If we start with my HR internship in college, and I have never seen anybody get fired for being brave. Like, there are stories of
Right.
people being whistleblowers, but what I'm saying is just in your job, doing your day-to-day job. I see people get fired for making assumptions, for not communicating well, for taking a risk that is well outside their scope. When they could have just like gone 20%, they went 100%. So I've seen people get fired for a real lapse in judgment, but for being a normal, ordinary human being who's like, you know what? I'm smart. I have skills. I think I can do this. People don't get fired for that,
No.
even when they make a mistake. What they do is they get coached, or they may actually get celebrated for making that mistake and showing a flaw in the system. But people don't get fired for, taking a risk with a customer. They get fired for being absolutely totally oblivious to emotional intelligence. That's what they get fired for. So
Yeah.
if you're worried about, like, I might get fired for being brave in my job in procurement, no, you're not going to get fired. You're awesome. You're amazing. They need you and they love you. And I know the economy is weird, but you can be 2% braver. I'm going to
Oh, that's
guarantee
good.
2% is not going to get you fired.
That's a really good metric. And it's those kinds of
Small.
solid pieces of information that we need. How brave, okay? Gauge what 2% is and then run. Run.
Yeah, yeah.
You've said the word people over and over again. So can data help us gain a nuanced understanding of the people on our teams and then help us make better strategic decisions?
I think so. I think we have to be careful about relying on data without conversation. So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk about this. Data can be very helpful. I believe that people are the sum of their actions, not necessarily what they say about themselves. So it's interesting if you can look at data and, take a look at action-based activity within an organization. But don't forget to talk to people and ask them, what are they thinking? How are they feeling? Why did they make the decision they made, both good or bad? It's really interesting to understand why people make decisions, not just to look at the end result of the decision itself. So if you can build a holistic view of who the humans are who are working for you and with you, you're better off as a leader, you're better off in a community, and you're definitely better off as an organization.
I really feel good about some of the leaders I've worked with now. Just listening to you say, I can name like five right off the top of my head that have, I think, I just made 28 years in B2B publishing, and I think I know those people had a lot to do with me still being in this field after 28 years, where you really enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I make a living on talking about bad bosses and bad HR stories and all of that. That has been kind of a cornerstone of my young and emerging career in this world of content and publishing. But the stories these days that I share are not rooted in mistakes or embarrassment. The stories that I share these days are someone taking a risk, betting on themselves, betting on their bosses, trusting their boss and moving the team forward, right? Those are the most amazing stories because everybody wins, everybody learns, and even in times of uncertainty, there is good news within organizations. People are doing great work solving the world's problems. And I love to showcase bravery, curiosity, courage more than mistakes. Mistakes are just givens, right? We all make those mistakes.
Sure.
But the leaders who are really lighting the world on fire, boy, when they do it, they're not just making an impact today, but they're making an impact for generations. Because anybody, Kanoe, who's worked with you over the past 28 years benefits from those great leaders that you had in your career.
Yeah,
It's
I,
like
I
the butterfly
agree.
effect.
I like that. I like the way you put that. I'm glad you went to that stories thing because I want to ask you now. Talk to us about some of the examples that you've seen of these pillars in action. Share with us some of the stories that have been powerful and in changing organizations or lives.
Yeah. Well, I worked with a really interesting industrial company that, the dudes and women were not on a computer all day long. When they needed to access systems, they went to a kiosk or they had iPads available. So this idea of performance management to them, it was kind of like, well, just look at the numbers, right? Don't talk to me about fluffy stuff. We don't have time for that. But the organization made a twofold commitment. One, they decided to improve their performance management technology, but they also decided to make a real investment in how they organized and spoke and gathered their workforce, even at these remote mining sites, right? Even at these really difficult sites. And it wasn't about pulling people together for cupcakes and like having these fake team. They don't have time for fake team building. But what they did was work consistently on sharing more organizational communication, what's happening in the company, how it impacts them directly. They also talked more and openly and honestly about what performance management could mean. It doesn't mean that you either have a job or you don't, or you get a 3% increase or you don't, but it could mean learning and development opportunities. It could mean opportunities for you to grow in ways that you didn't know. And they did this in conjunction with upgrading and updating their performance management system. And I think that's just such a good lesson because oftentimes we'll just throw another new system at employees and hiring managers and leaders, right? And it's like, well, great, I got to learn something else, but it doesn't really add value. It's the human connection that adds value. And when I think back on that story and about how people started to connect in different ways and how they actually saw improvements in productivity and revenue and they had all the gains, it's the right way to do it. And I'm very proud to know them and have worked with them.
I love that. Right on.
Yeah.
So before I wrap up our conversation, because I could talk, for 3 more hours, but before we wrap up, I just want to give you a chance to, do you have any parting words or any advice that you'd like to throw out to our HR leaders and people managers today before we say goodbye?
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about performance today in data and technology, but I still think that individuals are absolutely accountable for their performance. And I don't necessarily know that even the best human resources leaders and best people managers are truly that responsible for bringing out the best in people. But I think
Hmm.
by hiring people who are absolutely rooted in individual accountability, who have their own set of values, and also teaching the workforce that it's cool to take a time out and think about who you are and what matters to you most, by starting to develop some of those softer skills, we level up our collective population so that we really don't have to worry about performance management and the negative stuff down the road. So, any chance you get to really think about the human heart, the human spirit, about individual accountability, but giving
Yep.
people the time and space to figure out who they are and who they aren't pays dividends, not just for your company, but actually for humanity.
I agree. The most powerful leaders that we see profiled often, the ones that have made an impact in my life, they are the ones who do take that time and they have their personal mission statements.
Yeah.
They do decide, they do create that compass for themselves. I think too often we think of that as fluffy exercises, but truly it really does start with that very human introspective moment. So
Yeah.
um
I do want to say just this is very important to me. The best leaders out there don't motivate, they unleash.
ooh,
That's it. That's it. That's what they do. They give permission, they give space, and they teach people how to unleash their own purpose and their own passion. So it's not about saying the right thing, doing the right thing, getting up on stage at a company meeting and having a script that's been written by a executive comms team. It's about giving individuals the opportunity to be the CEOs of their own lives and doing it while they're working at your company. Well, that is something special. And I hope everybody gets the opportunity to experience that.
there's nothing more that I can say, folks. There's nothing more I want to say. I want us to end right there. Laurie, those were such good words. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this. And thank you very much for joining us today. This concludes our conversation.